Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to break down a really critical heart condition, aortic regurgitation. We're digging into the insights from Current Medical Diagnosis and Treatment 2025 to really understand what happens when this valve gets leaky and, most importantly, when it's time to step in. So let's just start with this one simple question, because it frames everything we're about to talk about. When you boil it all down, that's exactly what aortic regurgitation is. A crucial one-way door that's just not closing all the way. So this backward leak, this regurgitation, means the heart's main powerhouse, the left ventricle, has to deal with two streams of blood at once, the new blood coming in plus the old blood it just pumped out. This creates a unique problem called volume overload, and it puts a massive strain on the heart muscle over time.
All right, here's how we're going to tackle this. We're going to walk through it just like a clinical workup. What it is, what causes it, how it shows up in a patient, how we nail the diagnosis, and then the big one, when to intervene.
Okay, so let's get right into it. Why does this valve start to leak in the first place? And what exactly does that do to the heart's main pumping chamber? We used to think rheumatic heart disease was the main culprit, but that's really changed. Nowadays, it's all these other causes we see most often. Things like being born with a 2-leaflet valve instead of 3, infections that damage the valve, or even diseases that weaken the aorta itself. So how does the heart deal with all this extra blood? Well, it gets clever. It remodels itself in a really specific way called eccentric hypertrophy. Now think of it like this. Instead of the muscle wall just getting thicker, the heart adds new muscle cells end to end, kind of like adding links to a chain. This makes the whole chamber bigger to hold more blood. It's an incredible adaptation, but there's a limit. It can't keep this up forever. Okay, so that's what's happening on the inside. But what does it actually look and sound like when you're examining a patient? Let's get into the clinical picture. Now, this is a huge point. You have to know the difference between acute and chronic AR. Acute is a flat-out medical emergency. The heart has 0 time to adapt, and it fails fast. Chronic, though, that's a whole different beast. It's sneaky. Thanks to that eccentric hypertrophy we just talked about, patients can go for years, even decades, with no symptoms at all, until the heart finally starts to get tired. Okay, listen closely to this. That's it. That's the classic sound of chronic aortic regurgitation. It's that high-pitched, blowing sound happening right after the dub of the heartbeat, exactly when that valve is supposed to be slammed shut. It's literally the sound of blood rushing back through the leaky door. So think about what's happening with every single beat. The left ventricle is pumping out a huge amount of blood, the normal amount plus all that leaky stuff. This creates a really high pressure spike. But then, because blood immediately leaks back, the pressure in the arteries plummets. It's this huge swing from high to low that creates what we call a wide pulse pressure, and it's responsible for all the wild physical signs we're about to see. And this is where it gets really interesting. All of these classic signs with these fancy names, they're all just different ways of seeing that same underlying issue, that massive stroke volume and wide pulse pressure. I mean, from a pulse that feels like a water hammer to a head bobbing with each beat, it's the body showing us the sheer force of what the heart is doing. Okay, so we've got a pretty strong suspicion at this point, right? We've heard the murmur, we've seen the signs. So how do we lock in the diagnosis for sure?
Well, the first steps are usually an ECG and a chest X-ray. The ECG can show the electrical strain on that enlarged left ventricle, and the X-ray can literally show us the silhouette of a big, overworked heart. These give us huge clues, but there's one test that is the absolute gold standard.
And that test is echocardiography. This is just an incredible tool. It's basically an ultrasound for the heart, and it lets us see in real time exactly what the valve is doing, how much it's leaking, and what effect it's having on the heart muscle. The echo is really our roadmap for management. It doesn't just confirm the leak. It tells us why it's leaking, how bad it is, and, this is the big one, it gives us hard numbers on the size and pump function of the left ventricle. We track these numbers, usually every year, to know exactly when that heart is starting to get tired. All right, so this leads us to the million-dollar question. We found the leak. We're watching it with the echo. When do we actually step in and fix it? This is the central challenge in managing chronic AR. Now, you might think we just put everyone on medication, right? But here's a really key point. For patients with normal blood pressure, these afterload-reducing drugs just haven't been shown to change the outcome. So unless you're also treating high blood pressure, the focus shifts entirely to getting the timing of surgery just right. So the decision to go to surgery to replace that leaky valve really boils down to two things: symptoms or numbers. Either the patient starts to feel it, they get short of breath, tired, or the echo gives us cold, hard proof that the left ventricle is starting to fail. Let's look at those numbers. First up is LVEF, or ejection fraction. This is basically a measure of the heart's pumping power. What percentage of blood gets squeezed out with each beat? When that number dips below 50%, that's a major red flag. It tells us the pump is starting to fail. Next, we look at the size of the ventricle right after it squeezes. If that chamber is still over 50 millimeters wide, even after it's contracted, it means it's getting too stretched out and floppy. That's another clear sign of decompensation that points towards surgery. And finally, we measure the ventricle when it's completely full and relaxed. If that dimension gets bigger than 65 millimeters, the heart has just become dangerously enlarged. Even if the pump function seems okay for the moment, that extreme size is a problem in and of itself. So let's just pull this all together. These are the 4 big triggers for surgery. Number 1 is subjective. The patient starts having symptoms. The other 3 are completely objective, hard numbers from the echo: the ejection fraction, or LVEF, the end systolic dimension, or LVESD, and the end diastolic dimension, LVEDD. If you cross the line on any one of these, it's time to act. And this quote from the source material really hits it home. If you can hear this murmur during a physical exam, that's not something to just watch. It means it's time for that patient to see a cardiologist, get that crucial first echo, and establish a game plan for monitoring. And this really brings us full circle, right back to the central challenge. It is this delicate dance. You're trying to balance years of watchful waiting against the risk of waiting too long and causing permanent damage to the heart muscle. The whole goal is to use that regular monitoring and those clear triggers to intervene at the perfect moment. And that really is the art of cardiology.